Kia ora koutou, ko Vic Crockford takaunga, ko Pākehā toku iwi, there's three! You're really not going to escape me. Ko tangata tiriti. It is just absolutely wonderful to join you here at the Creative Spaces Conference for 2024 with many hats on, but most importantly as the chair of Arts Access Aotearoa, the absolutely fabulous organisation that's brought us here together today. So I'd just love to give the team at Arts Access a quick round of applause. I want to open the introduction of our panellists by reflecting on Dr. Seacombe's article in the Post today. She said that creativity is social action. And I think that everything you just heard from the wonderful Libby underscores that magnificently. Creativity is social action, it's humanity. To be creative is to fulfill a very deep part of what it is to be human. And storytelling is such an essential part of that creativity. As a communications professional, I often say that our brains are wired to learn through stories. Stories move us to tears, to action, to share. They move us beyond reality and into imagination and courage. The courage to understand what the world could be, not just what it is. And the stories we tell about ourselves, who we are, and what our place is in the world are often the most powerful stories. And so much of the work that you will do at Creative Spaces and within your creative spaces is about helping ensure that those self-stories are positive, inclusive, and purposeful. We are all, each of us, constantly navigating change in the world around us, and the change in our own lives. And I often reflect on a self-story that changed for me in the course of a single day that is a big part of what led me to Arts Access Aotearoa and what I'm really looking forward to reflecting on with Libby and Sophie. 4 years ago, at 10 a.m. in the morning, I booked myself in for an optometrist appointment. It had been a long time since I'd had a school checkup in my teens. I'd had 2 kids since then, and I realised that my eyesight was changing and it was time. Perhaps I needed reading glasses to get a check-in. And 2 days later, I walked out of an ophthalmologist with a diagnosis of a degenerative eye condition, retinitis pigmentosa. So no one in my family had it. It is a genetic inherited condition. So it was a chance magical collision of my parents' genes, which had resulted in me having it. And over time, my eyesight has been degenerating, and I am constantly navigating a new lived reality for myself. We all are constantly navigating new lived realities, but one of the things that has always kept me buoyant about what that change means in terms of my life, and certainly with 2 young children, the practical implications of my life is the joy of the arts. So I grew up dancing, I grew up absolutely loving theatre, I grew up absolutely loving film, and being able to participate in this community with you all, where we are all advocating for that joy and that connection and that sense of capability to be as inclusive as possible and as accessible to everybody as possible is absolutely, a joy of my life. So I want to thank you for the work that you do and the work that you do to ensure that people like me who are navigating change are always able to access the uplifting power of the arts and the power of creativity and the power of storytelling. So ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. It is now my pleasure to introduce our panellists who will join me up here to talk about how to capture and communicate our stories and how their work with messaging has influenced change, and boy, has it influenced change. So first of all, I'd love to welcome Libby back to the stage. I really don't think I need to introduce you any better than what you just introduced yourself. But please come and join us on one of the comfy seats. I keep wondering what might be in the water north of Wellington, because we've got Libby here from Auaha, and we've got Sophie from Kāpiti. So there's something going on, because absolutely brilliant. Sophie, please join us. For those of you who don't know Sophie, she's a councillor and activist from Kāpiti and founded School Strike for Climate in Aotearoa, New Zealand, going on to coordinate a movement which mobilised 170,000 people from across the country in September 2019. And I can say that my children and I were on the march with you in Wellington, Sophie. She then ran for council at the age of 18 and was elected as one of the country's youngest councillors onto the Kāpiti Coast District Council. She now chairs its Strategy, Operations and Finance Committee, and I am sure you use messaging in your daily life to do that job. So thank you, Sophie. I'm actually going to come and join you.
Great.
Thank you. It feels better than lording over you from the lectern. Okay, so look, this is the point as the facilitator for this panel, where I encourage you all to really get onto Slido. So we'll have it coming up in front of us on the screen, but it's a really useful tool to hear your voice and your questions. As facilitator, I get the right to filter out any that are a bit controversial, but I'm sure that all of yours will be positive and uplifting questions. So I did want to start, though, by just allowing you both to introduce how important stories and storytelling have been to you in the movements for change that you've both been a part of. So Sophie, perhaps if I could start with you.
Yeah, sure. Well, kia ora koutou katoa, as was mentioned. Ko Sophie Handford tō koingoa, no paikakiriki aho. I'm a proud Kāpiti Coaster, so honoured to be here alongside Libby and to bear witness to the amazing work that she and her team are doing in our community, and also to see some other representatives from our Kāpiti Coast crew. We've got Sarah and the rest of the team from Te Arakōrawai. I can see Dennis from the Shed and others from the Shed project. So yeah, welcome, and to all of you doing amazing work, as has already been stated. So for me, storytelling is and has been crucial, both the stories that we outwardly communicate, but also the stories that we tell ourselves. Working in the climate space, we know how kind of dreary and massive and just existential the climate kōrero is, and the destruction that we are imposing on our planet, and the complete lack of balance that we have with Papa Tuanuku, and we actually rely on her for our very survival. That can feel like such a massive, massive intersectional, structural, systemic issue to try and tackle. And so I found, working in the climate space, one of the most important stories to tell, or one of the most important lenses to have over the stories that we tell, especially when working with young people, with rangatahi who, most of whom have got involved with the School Strike for Climate movement through a sense of fear about the kind of world that they'll be inheriting. We have to find a way of telling a story which encompasses a vision of climate justice, one which is positive, one which talks about the co-benefits that come with rebalancing our relationship with the environment, one that comes with the amazing benefits of walking and cycling and enabling that instead of continuing to proliferate fossil fuels, which we know are digging us deeper and deeper into this hole, and we have everything we need to get ourselves out. Talking about how much more happy and healthy we can be. And so really trying to sell that vision of climate justice and encouraging people to partake in activism through a sense of love for the planet, through a sense of love for future generations, instead of this fear which can sometimes really paralyze us and lead us to just be stagnant and to not really know where to go. I guess another way that I would interpret storytelling in my day-to-day life, both in running for council and then now in sitting around the table, is I found that when I ran for council as an 18-year-old, I was told a lot of stories about who other people thought I was, knocking on their doors as an 18-year-old, asking them to give me their vote and to support my plight, to be around that table advocating for the planet and for people. A lot of people really sought to tell me that I was too young, that I was underqualified, that I didn't have the right life experience to best, represent them around that table. And so I found that the stories that I had to tell myself were ones of self-belief and just affirming that if you know your why, if you know your purpose, if you believe that there is a space for that to be spoken into and acted on, then do not wait. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? These issues will continue to cycle through generations unless there's a circuit breaker. And I think we happen to be alive at what is such a crucial moment in time where so much hangs in the balance for our people, for those who are marginalised, for our planet, for nature. So what kind of story are we going to tell? But also what kind of story are we going to write? We hold the pen. We very much hold the pen. And I just wanted to also, one last thing on this, mention one quote which has really stuck with me and helped me to, refine my why and then continue to understand how that must be a part of my day-to-day mahi around the council table and in activism. Story, as it turns out, was crucial to our evolution, more so than opposable thumbs. Opposable thumbs let us hang on, but story told us what to hang on to. And so I find myself in these council conversations where bureaucracy is everywhere. We're always told reasons why things can't happen, why there isn't money, why, this is the way things have always been, so it's the way that they have to be. But what are we trying to hang on to? If we don't, stand for anything, what will we fall for? And so stand for something and hold on to why you're doing what you're doing, because it can get tough. And I know it's tough for all of you listening to the Minister speak, and also the Prime Minister yesterday at the Local Government New Zealand conference saying he wants to wipe the 4 well-beings out of the Local Government Act because he wants us to get back to basics. But last I heard, supporting our community was the most basic thing that we should be doing. So I am just... And who determines what the basics are? Our communities should determine that. We need that to be grassroots. And so it's frustrating as heck, but what I am encouraged by is that there are people like us and we have to stand in solidarity. Whether it's the environmental movement, the movement for the arts, the movement for democracy, the movements of Indigenous communities in mana whenua. Sorry, it's a really long way of introducing myself, but when I get passionate, things just roll. So that's who I am, that's what I'm about, and I'll pass to Libby.
Koenei ki te ki, tuakana teina, Like who gets to say, in my lifetime, I can say to you, Soph, that it was very, like I said, hard to say, I am this. Young people now will say, I am this. And we have to listen. We actually have to listen because, some of the young people that I meet are born with incredible foresight. And like again, returning to whakapapa, it's when you find out where they come from or, who their people are, it makes complete sense. He kākono, I ruia mai I rangi we are a seed. And we forget that because our current world says it's all about the individual. And that's why storytelling, we've got access now to stories everywhere. If you've got 25 apps on your phone, you've got all those feeds. But most of us will probably, flick through those when you get a minute, and it's in itself, it's sold a story because it's just all this stuff. When you pull people together as a community, whether that's through activating them for a march, come and do this art class, this is our group, because we have a shared living life experience, a whānau around a dinner table, so many different things come out of that, of sharing of stories. And we talk about the ihihi, the vibration, that there's all these things, all these senses that we've lost as human beings. I'm working on a feature film that we've been developing for 4 years, and one of the things that we've come to is there is no language in this film. This is a time 1,000 years ago in our country where there were so many manu that you probably couldn't have a conversation anyway, or the tōhora and the moana, and there's accounts of that. What if we just could look at each other? Where are those ways of interacting that didn't come with sound and, so I'm talking to people in the room who have superpowers already, like what if there are no kupu, no words, but we know what we're saying? And I'm often reminded when I go to a country and I'm embarrassed because I don't have another language. I'm fortunate I have two languages, Te Reo Māori and Pākehā, English. But when I go to a country I have no language, all of us have experienced that. You can still get to know someone. Because guess what? We have movement at the end of our ringa. We know how to converse. So storytelling is made up of a lot of things, a lot of physical, a lot of eye contact, a lot of vibrations, a lot of instinct. We're going back to the instinct, the rongo, the instinct that we're born with. And that's why babies are probably, we watch our babies when they're, and we're like, I'm sure they're saying something to me. I'm sure that baby's saying something to me. I have a niece that's like that. From the minute she was born, I just knew her. And she's, 17 now, and her and I have these conversations just sitting in silence with each other because she is the embodiment of her whakapapa, he kākano I rui e mai I rangi. She can never be lost. So stories, yes. I love what Sophie talks about the feeling of, being so overwhelmed by these massive events that are happening, and sometimes when you're in it, and I think of Gaza and I think of the Ukraine and I think of, all of the conflicts that are happening when we're in it, how do we have the ability to, because it feels like we can't shift. We can't shift, we can't do anything. But, here's the thing, and this is another thing coming from a journalist's, background. When you take the storytellers out, or you think that it's been done for you, someone else is fixing the problem, we need to keep talking about these things. We need to keep talking about the things that are, seem immovable. And that's the job of the filmmaker too. And that's why when I see these young people making 1-minute stories, like people have said, we've all discussed it, all the adults in the room will be going, Instagram 4 years ago, oh my God, it's sucking our kids' attentions and therefore their brains are turning to mush and all that sort of stuff. When I watch our young people tell a story in 30 seconds or a minute, it can be so impactful, like so impactful. The other thing is, never dismiss teenagers and thinking that they don't have a perspective, because they're actually the ones that are looking at their feeds. They're not all watching rubbish. So don't discount what they've got to say, but have you had a conversation around the dinner table? Or have you allowed them to not allowed, that's not the right word, have you let them have their voice? And so the film, coming together as a community and watching films to me is part of that whole thing. It activates people. I want to share one story because it really was, there was a situation in our third year when I went, I think we might have a problem. And the whānau are all like, there's not a problem. And I was like, who is our audience? Like, I'm looking at the festival growth like this, and I went, where's our Māori in our room? Like, they're all hanging at the door. They're all hanging at the door, peeping around the, as people are going. They're not in the space. I'm not saying this, but the numbers. It was a lot of elderly Pākehā. And I went, is it because they have the time? I mean, the tickets we've kept the tickets cheap on purpose so that everyone can come, or rangatahi come for free, all this sort of stuff, but where's our audience? And in that thinking, when I thought it might be a problem and we're going to have to figure this out, one of the first screenings of that year, an elderly man stood up, he would have been in his 80s, and he said, I'm from quite a wealthy part of the Kāpiti Coast. He said, I only came here because I didn't have anything to do, but I came to this screening, and he said, and I'm standing here to say that I am ashamed, that I am 82 years old and I never knew any of this. He came to see The Price of Peace, which was about what happened in Tūhoe, the raids. And he stood there in front of a cinema full of people who were all staring at him. And this was a very strong Māori screening. And he said, and I want to say to all of you in this room, I am sorry. I've had a high-powered job. I've always done well. I've retired for the last 15 years. He said, and I thought that this didn't happen in this country. I thought that this was a beat-up. And he said, and I'm here to say I apologise. And that was a big move for me, because what I realised was people are hungry for story. They're hungry to see other perspectives. They're hungry to see, Standing Rock. We saw it in the news, but when the Standing Rock documentary filmmakers who had been embedded at Standing Rock came to Māori land, that's when the community, the whole theatre stood up. Māori, Pākehā, elderly, young people, and they all raised their fists. We didn't ask them to. The screening finished, the filmmaker was making her way to the front of the cinema, and they all stood in silence with a raised fist. This is what Sophie's talking about. It activates something deeper than our fear, or perhaps the stereotypes that we're surrounded by, or perhaps something of the inertia that we all feel in our lives. Hey.
I just want to pick up on something that you've both talked about, and it's the intergenerational aspect, but it's also this talking across these arbitrary divides. And I say arbitrary, they're real, but they're arbitrary in that there are ways of communicating in a common language with each other, to your example of going overseas and waving your hands around. So when you're thinking about your activism, your dialogue around the council table, that example of the 82-year-old Pākehā man standing up, what are the key elements of the stories that you're telling or introducing to them that you think are creating that sense of accountability or change or emotional response? What do you think gets someone like that across the line to stand up and say, I was wrong, or I have found my own power?
Yeah. I think it's, no one walks out of screenings at Māori land. Like, when I've been going to film festivals across the world for many, many years, and I've been in theatres like in Berlin, these supposed A festivals where people have actually got up and left the room. Like, not just one or two, but half the theatres walked out. And I get that when it's content that might be harrowing in a way or exploitative, I get that. But Indigenous films don't tend to go for that type of exploitation, shock, value, for the value of it or whatever. I mean, even the nudity, we've been laughing about this, Māori filmmakers, for some time now. Like, we're so nervous about doing that sort of stuff. And I'm talking of a generation. Because we always think, is my grandmother going to watch this? Is my queer in the room? I don't know if I could do that. What would our queer think? So that's that intergenerational. We are responsible. If you put that story out there, it's not my film, it's our film. This is our story. And that question is very much at the forefront when we are talking about now creating the stories from our ancestral past. Do you have the right to tell that story? Whose story are you telling, and have you sought permission to tell that story? I've had this conversation with lots of Pākehā filmmakers who go, oh God, no, I want to tell that story. And I'm like, well, good luck to that, because it's actually a community, and so it's derived from the community, made in a community, broadcast to a community, and you are responsible for that reaction. It shouldn't be a place of fear, but this is the thing that I think actually makes it stronger.
And on that too, I feel like the person telling the story that's being told, and also the community to which you're telling that story is important. So the way I kind of tailor certain stories or messaging in a council context will be very different to how I tailor messages in the activism world. And I think ultimately for me that comes from, they're different, but they're also the same in that you show up as your whole self. I think you try to, hopefully we all do, in the spaces that we move in. But I think one thing that I really resonate with is that we're all human beings, we're not human doings. So our jobs matter, and what we do, for sure it matters, but ultimately how we are and how we relate is just as important, if not more important. And how we be in relation with and in community to and alongside, I think is fundamental to how we storytell. And just, there's a question on here about what makes a story. And what I found to be most powerful in sort of storytelling, especially around the council table, is, again, thinking about the sort of whakapapa of an idea or of some mahi, and making sure that the people who have contributed to that are honoured, so we're not just continuously trying to jump around and source new bits of mahi or create new stories, but that we're acknowledging the whakapapa of an idea or the whakapapa of a story. And then talking about this moment in time, I think we often talk about the big issues that we're trying to tackle, and I feel like it kind of plays into that sort of deficit mindset, which, and this was mentioned earlier on today, I think if we believe that, if we buy into it, and if we let our kind of own narrative that might be telling us that we're powerless or that there's sort of no route through, if we let that win, then we're powerless, but if we intentionally and actively decide to think a different way and to choose to create a different narrative for ourselves and our communities, then I think we can create that. So talking about how important this moment in time is to choose which side of history we want to be on through rewriting our own internal narratives, but also the stories that we're telling and the way that we're framing that. And then in thinking about the future, again, through the School Strike for Climate, I never ever in 1,000 million years expected that a team of 4 of us from Kāpiti College would rally a team of over 50 people from all corners of the country and then go on to mobilise 170,000 people across New Zealand. We had 290 businesses close their doors for the day. I had the Prime Minister's private secretary on the phone she wanted to kōrero with us. She wanted to be answerable to us because she was feeling the pressure. And that was because we were saying, hang on a second, the one future that this current government is writing will head us down this path. But again, if we move from where we are right now and we decide which side of history we want to be on, we decide we want to stand up for future generations and be on the side of our mokopuna and make mokopuna decisions, we're going to have to write this kind of future, and maybe that means a different kind of politics. Maybe that means a politics where we have a ministry for future generations, where we have, a chair in every room that represents those future generations. Because, those who aren't yet born in our planet, in these conversations, they can't raise their hand and tell their own stories. So there has to be people who help to be stewards of what a future that actually takes care of people and planet looks like. And so when we talk about the future that we want to inherit, I think that was where a lot of people were like, whoa, okay, so something different is possible. And so speaking into the possibility and choosing to believe that we have agency to step into that possibility and create something meaningful, I think is how we gain traction. And we kept it simple. In council, there's so much unnecessary lingo and acronyms, and just stuff gets so lost. But keeping that story simple and structured and grounded in the why, I think is the only way to get cut through. And if you connect with people, again, on that sort of being to being level, heart to heart, some of us might be wearing suits, others might not be. We're all different, but ultimately we all, I think, just want a place to belong, and we want to feel like we're able to create the kind of impact that we want to create in the world. And I think by approaching people in that way and telling stories in that way, we help to give permission to others to do the same. And yeah, that's kind of my take on
it's beautiful.
That question.
Now, we are over time. That really angry red clock. And that sense of belonging and inclusion, I think, is an absolutely beautiful contribution, given the work that creative spaces do to create exactly that.
Can I answer those two questions
I was just
very
going to
briefly?
say, I would like to honour the audience
Yeah.
questions though. So if the team at Arts Access will forgive us, I am going to let us answer one of those questions. And I just, if it's all right, I think just to keep us focused, to just talk to how storytelling can restore critical funding.
Yeah. So the two questions are around the Creative Schools program being no longer funded, and also the Minister talking about refining funding into one pool. You know, as a small organisation that has built on, you know, we have vertically and intentionally built, and we decided very early on that we would not go to government. You know, that our self-determination, our own determination as a community was more important than, you know, going down those tracks. So there are allies in the community, and a lot of you will already have found some of those allies, but, you know, there's more people out there that are wanting to come on board. The philanthropics have done a great job in taking away the sort of white saviour, top-down approach. You know, it can't be the way that the government then dismisses its responsibilities, but, you know, there are more people out there than we think. You know, we don't know everybody. I don't know everybody in Auaha, so I'm pleasantly surprised when somebody comes and says, can I have a conversation? You know, every story you tell can be heard, you know, so tell your story and don't be shy about telling your story. And the other thing is don't be shy about saying no or bugger off, you know. I had the joy, I was pretty angry about it at the time, but now it's a joyful moment of telling one of our former Prime Ministers to bugger off, because he came into our space. We welcomed him and we showed him the 80 young people, rangatahi tamariki from our local kura Māori, who were doing an animation course, and you could have heard a pin drop. They were all drawing pencils and paper, and the teacher said to me, we don't have pencils and paper at school anymore because we've got iPads. And so seeing these kids of all ages drawing their storyboards with one of our, you know, animators, asking them to use their imagination, and this person said, oh, that's great that they're doing drawing, but how are you going to keep them out of gangs? You know, a lack of imagination is the biggest problem that we all have to face. That these people that come in and are supposedly making decisions for us as a country lack imagination. They need to go and have a story read to them. They need to go and watch a film of substance, you know. They need to not go to the same spaces. They need to come into the community. They need to see that, you know, I'm sorry, but, you know, this idea that disabled people and trans people and Māori people and Pacifica people and, you know, we all sit in separate spaces. They haven't come to our place and seen how we roll. And I think that lack of imagination is the thing that we all have to find a way, and bugger off is a good way of dealing with some of it, but, you know, to not lose our energy and our passion, you know, with having to deal with those people or their applications.
And we're going to have to leave it on that note of passion. Thank you.
They can all bugger off.
Yeah, we're going to bugger off
Stage,
and have a cup of tea. I just want to acknowledge before we all go and make our way to have morning tea, I believe, although the facilitator will actually tell us just the time and energy and expertise and just wahine toa. Thank you so much, both of you. Another round of applause.
Thank you, Room.